Certainty or new life? For this Sunday, Jen chose to connect the letting go of certainty with the reception of new life. Letting go of our desire for certainty is not easy. We long for certainty. It's human nature. In the words of a lovely Simon and Garfunkel song, "I'd rather be a hammer than a nail. Yes, I would, if I only could." We prefer to be the one who acts with confidence, certain in the outcome, rather than the one acted upon, never knowing for sure from which direction the next blow will come. Uncertainty is all around us today in the midst of a war that is impacting countries around the world. For those in the Middle East, present and future personal safety is far from certain. Elsewhere, there is uncertainty about gas prices, economies, and even whether what one is being told is accurate. Living with uncertainty is unsettling and sometimes downright frightening. At the risk of being a mite academic, I'd like to consider certainty from the perspective of how human thinking works. Our brain is constantly predicting what will happen next based on our previous experience and our existing beliefs. Essentially, the brain forms a hypothesis about what will happen and then adjusts it based upon new input. New input could be a new experience, sensory data, or information from a trusted source. Our working hypothesis is our bias. Input that aligns with our bias increases our certainty, and any input that challenges that bias promotes uncertainty. Uncertainty forces us to make choices, take risks. It can also be an opportunity to examine our bias and recognize unconscious motivations that are running our lives and triggering our reactions. The disciples and the Pharisees in this story are being very human and are articulating their bias and belief systems. The disciples seem certain that disability is the result of sin. "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" If you were taught from childhood that God will bless the righteous and punish the unrighteous, you may conclude that suffering is always due to someone's bad deeds. How often do we assume that these bad deeds or failings are those of the person who happens to be suffering? However, given that parental choices impact children and that this man was born blind, one might also think that his blindness might be due to something his parents did or failed to do. How much we wish the world were so simple. Assuming that suffering is due to someone's bad choice, we have created a world dominated by a system of retributive justice, in which it is thought that things are set right and justice is achieved by retribution, that is, by inflicting punishment on those found to be at fault. Yet we live in a world in which we see that evildoers are not always punished, and those who are punished are not always changed for the better by the punishment. While those who are faithful, kind, and generous are sometimes abused rather than blessed in this life, retributive justice is not working. Do we imagine fear, anger, intimidation, threat, and punishment are going to lead people to love? We cannot lead people to the highest level of motivation by teaching them the lowest. God always and forever models the highest, and our task is merely to imitate God. In the prophets, Amos, Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Hosea, we see that God's justice is restorative. In each case, after the prophet chastises the Israelites for their transgressions against him, the prophet continues by saying, in effect, "And here's what Yahweh will do for you. God will love you more than ever. God will love you into wholeness. God will pour out upon you a gratuitous, unbelievable, unaccountable, irrefutable love that you will finally be unable to resist." Here, in our story, Jesus immediately focuses on restoration rather than blame. He tells the disciples and us that suffering or disability might have a different purpose than punishment. I will come back to this. First, let's look at the perspectives that are being challenged when the Pharisees received the news that Jesus has given sight to a man born blind. Assumption 1. Making mud and healing count as work, and pious Jews do not work on the Sabbath. 2. Anyone from God will observe the Sabbath according to our rules. 3. Those who are right with God can heal others. Only they can heal others. The Pharisees are divided. Some see the healing and insist that no sinner could perform such a miracle. Some believe that only rule followers, Sabbath observers, can be God-sent healers. In our spiritual development, humans begin with dualistic either-or thinking, and we must first be capable of some basic distinctions between good and evil before we are able to hold paradox. The divided responses of the Pharisees reminded me of the theories of James Fowler on the stages of faith. Are any of you familiar with those? Okay, so I'll give you a little summary. Fowler says that we start in infancy with an undifferentiated faith and lean toward a trusting or untrusting stance based upon our early experiences of nurturing. From age 3 to 7, an intuitive projective faith is a set of impressions that are largely gained from children's parents or other significant adults. Between then and 12, most progress to a mythic, literal faith and start to work out the difference between verified facts and things that might be more fantasy or speculation. Religious stories, myths, and symbols tend to be understood concretely. In adolescent to early adult years, a synthetic, conventional faith forms with critical, self-aware shift, where individuals question inherited beliefs and take personal ownership of their faith. Around the mid-20s to early 30s, some will shift to an individuative, reflective faith in which inherited beliefs are questioned and people take personal responsibility and ownership in their faith. Then, in midlife, a conjunctive faith may emerge, which embraces paradox and contradiction, allowing for a deeper understanding of mystery and the limitations of one's own perspective. Only a few people move beyond this to a universalizing faith that transcends self-interest, embracing selfless love and a desire for universal justice, leading them to challenge established systems. Did you notice an increased tolerance for uncertainty and for other perspectives as people move into those last 3 stages of spiritual growth? I believe that spiritual maturity requires us to hold our certainties a bit more lightly, to dare to question some of what we thought was a given, and to be at peace with not having all the answers. It allows us to feel less threatened by the possibility that we might be mistaken about some of what we long believed to be true. When our current understanding and new data don't align, we can ask questions, just like the Pharisees. Maybe something is wrong with this new data. If so, we can return to the comfort of our familiar view. Maybe the new data is valid. We might have to shift our perspective. This is what the psychologists call cognitive dissonance. It isn't comfortable to think we might be wrong. We might have to change to let go of a certainty or certainties. If someone told you that their blindness had been cured by the application of a mud pack and washing it off in a bathing pool, what certainties would that challenge in you? Does it sound like magic? Do you want data showing that this cure is a repeatable one? For the blind man, the certainty that this life-changing event is real and that it happened because of Jesus' actions and instructions is unshakable. For some of the Pharisees are now ready to question an assumption that breaking Sabbath rules would make it impossible for Jesus to have healed the blind man. When we encounter data that is at odds with our assumptions, we too have the opportunity to question both the new data and our current assumptions, bias, and preferences. Looking back at the prayer of confession that Jen composed, and that was on my sheet but not yours, I'm sorry. She spoke about creating stories to cover up our own responsibilities and preferring being right over being reconciled. Can we see how our desire for certainty plays into these things? When we want to be sure that we are not at fault in any way, we have a hard time hearing another perspective. When we busy ourselves assigning blame and punishing individuals, we can also overlook the contribution of our social systems. To quote a beloved teacher, Richard Rohr, harping upon individual sin and convicting wrongdoers might shame a few individuals into half-hearted obedience. But in terms of societal change, it's been a notorious Christian failure. Retributive justice has backfired because it is not founded in a positive love and appreciation of the good, the true, and the beautiful in the world or in creation, unquote. There is another way of taking responsibility for the common good, a way that deals more gently with our brokenness, a way that restores and heals. I believe that the first step is to be slower to judge others, and sometimes even ourselves. Restorative justice requires setting aside our certainties and suspending judgment about who did what and why as we listen to all the perspectives. It requires listening deeply to understand the impacts on both individuals and on the community. It requires working collaboratively to find a way to heal and restore both the victims and the victimizers. Restorative justice is like that prophetic message which begins with detailing the crimes of the tribes and the nations and telling of the woes that will come upon them, but ends with a promise of restoration for God's people. It involves setting aside our blinders and biases to acknowledge the reality of our mistakes and requires us to own the damage we have caused, that our mistakes have caused or will cause. It takes courage to set aside our certainties, to step back away from black and white assumptions, and to discern truth in a landscape of varied colors. It calls for repentance, a turning around, adjusting our compass, and learning to walk more gently upon the earth. It takes time and commitment to change our mind, our goals, and our habits. It takes time and effort to restore trust and heal relationships. But as the AA groups assure us, our higher power is there to help us. The God we see in Jesus' ministry is bent on healing us and our world. So Lent is a time for pruning away the dead wood and preparing for new growth, new life. To return to the question of suffering, I believe that the suffering of individuals and in society at large can be viewed as similar to physical pain. Pain is there to tell us that something is amiss. We can respond with painkillers or distractions that dampen down our awareness of pain and suffering. Or we can seek and hopefully address the root causes. Suffering is there to get our attention. For the blind man, the healing allowed him not only to see the world, but to see and recognize the source of his healing. For Michael Fitzgerald, my second husband, and for me, Mike's trial and imprisonment served to open our eyes to the failure of our legal and incarceration system. The sufferings of our lives helped us to better understand those who suffer from discrimination, injustice, and marginalization. His experience of shared suffering allowed him to see the humanity of the condemned. My time without a home has made me more valuable as an ally of those who remain unhoused or on the verge of losing housing. Those who have borne pain can use their experience to motivate themselves to become better healers. Sometimes pain and suffering open the door to new purpose and new life that brings healing to the afflicted and to those around them. As the pain of our crumbling society draws our attention to the fact that the systems of our modern world, economic, political, and ecological, are reaching their limits and falling apart, may God free us from old biases that would try to restore the familiar and help us instead to learn to nurture a new and better world that might come next. May God help our faith communities to become places ready to accompany communities through a time of profound transition, a time that requires letting go of certainty, being open to new ideas, new perspectives, and the awesome, love-filled wind of God's Holy Spirit. May it be so.